first, I have to start with 17 years with Gasworld. That's crazy. I've barely been alive for 17 years. This morning, I thought we were the same age. Now I'm a little confused. And then I look at Jeff, and Jeff's like 110 by now. But he has the energy of someone much younger. And so my first takeaway today, not from any speakers, but just understanding that we're like drinking from the fountain to youth working in the CO2 industry. So thank you both for that. I appreciate it. Keeps me excited.
So all of you waited around for that good joke. He worked all morning on that, apparently.
It landed. That's off the cuff. We are super excited to be in Music City, and I know the distractions of Broadway are down the street, but thankfully y'all haven't ran off, at least not yet. Maybe some of you. We promised to try to be as entertaining as Broadway. Jeff was going to do the song and dance, but he's not down for the public shaming, so we're just going to have an informative session today. I'll let you kind of kick off what we plan to do, but some exciting guests will be joining us here in a few minutes after we recap.
Yeah, so we are well aware that nobody has eaten and it's getting kind of late, but we're going to try to keep you entertained for a little bit longer and hopefully a little educational, and kind of recap a little bit, summarize everything that happened already this morning going into tomorrow's sessions. But yeah, we are Jeff Holyoak and Luke Lana of Catching Carbon, and we really appreciate y'all being part of our podcast. So we're going to break this up into two parts. The first part is kind of going to go back to 2 years ago this week on this stage, but in Chicago. We made some kind of predictions of what we thought the market was going to do, where we were going to go, what was going to happen in the market. And by predictions, we said, today versus tomorrow, and tomorrow being 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years from now. And we've heard a lot of great talking points about that already today. So it feeds into that. The second part is we have a panel of some great new technologies. We heard Scott talk about, we need alternative sources and we need to get these online, and some of them are coming, and there's a lot of different investments and technologies coming online. We have a few of them that they're not just capturing CO2 to sequester it or get the 45Q credits and things like that. Some of that's a part of it for sure, but they're trying to capture CO2 and service that market, service our merchant markets that are, starting to get eliminated by all the reasons that we've already heard. So two-part session in all this, but just to kind of quickly recap, what we talked about, a couple of years ago was, the market is all about disruption, and what we need is innovation. We need incentivization. That was the 45Q aspect that was still 2 years ago, just kind of coming around. And we need impact. We need change. Something has to be different, or we're going to just be sitting here. And we talked about the innovator's dilemma, which is basically when great companies fail because they don't choose to react to the changing markets, and we keep doing things the way they are. Now, we're not going to sit here today and say any of that's happened yet, but it's slowly getting there. We heard Maura say we need 5 300-ton per day plants in the next 5 years, I believe it is, just to sustain our natural growth. We heard Scott say 1,600 tons over the next 5 years a day. 1,600 tons are going to go offline by their projections. More could. Other things could happen. The Summit pipeline's a huge piece of all of that as well. How long does that take before we start putting liquid? There's not a drop of liquid has really been sequestered in a lot of these up and coming ideas. So what we said was, what's the market disruption and where's it going? So I talked about the innovator's dilemma here again. When new technologies cause great companies to fail, well, we saw Mara's list of who has the market share. It hasn't changed dramatically. A couple of swaps. You see some of the independent guys really growing over the last few years. Poet and Reliant to the best suppliers of any gas molecule in the country, probably in the world, and they are continuously growing their market share because of the way they do it and how they do it. And they're innovative and they're disruptive and they execute, and as do some of the others as well. So that's what we're really kind of here. So going into it. Did you want to jump in here so I keep going?
Yeah, I want to just think on the innovator's dilemma for a second. And as you mentioned, Reliant and Poet growing, but also they're not new. They're just executing very well. And you think of the CO2 space, Abby mentioned it this morning, we are asset heavy. So the barrier to entry is high. Tyler mentioned that supply and demand are pretty even. So there wasn't a whole lot of incentive to get involved. And what that meant was minimal investment into the CO2 market, kind of maintaining the status quo, and that was fine. Until things started to change and these new players come. And now they're being incentivized by grants, and we're going to hear about that from some of our partners that jump on stage here. Investment is being made, and things are starting to change. So have we seen these great companies fail? No. But are we on the cusp of that innovator's dilemma? Absolutely, and it's going to be the next 3 to 5 years where we really start to see the shakeup.
Yeah, I think Bruce put it extremely well. I think Rob quoted Bruce to say it, put it really well. From 2020 or 2021 through 2030, it's a state of disruption. I'm sorry, it wasn't disruption. Turbulence, I think, was the word.
Turmoil. It was
turmoil.
really painful.
Turbulence, disruption, and turmoil all put together, and that's how we get lunch. So no, I mean, it's 100% accurate. That's where we're in. We're in this state of turmoil, and it's going to continue. What are we going to do about it? So very quickly, the 4 predictions that we had 2 years ago to this day, and we've already talked about these all morning. The where you get your CO2 from today will not be where you get it from tomorrow. The who you get it from may not be who you get it from tomorrow. And what you pay, most importantly, for CO2 today will not be what you pay tomorrow. And so with that, we just want to kind of look backwards or look forwards and say, okay, 2 years ago we said this. What's happened? We've heard a lot about this today already, so we're just going to quickly recap before I bring our panel up. And then lastly,
yeah, 4th question. This is our favorite because we can quickly
great
check
prediction.
this one.
I'm really good at the predictions.
Right. What is attendance going to look like? Jeff said nobody's going to be here next year, which is now last year. But come back to 2024, we're going to have a packed house. And we can see that, so let's pop that up. How did we do last year? What did attendance look like year over year? We actually did increase, which is insane because you are human. You can be wrong. I didn't think that was possible. But I'll give you your flowers. I think you were directionally right. I think last year, there wasn't as much panic in the room, and we saw the poll earlier. We feel like supply and demand are pretty balanced. That wasn't the case 2 years ago. Last year, we started seeing some of the new faces. It wasn't just the same old distributors and a couple end users. We're starting to get into the new technologies, the new uses of CO2. So attendance was up, in my opinion, because we started to welcome new members to the family. But this year, really an impactful difference in where we were 2 years ago. Attendance way up, just like you predicted it would be.
Yeah, I mean, the notion was back in 2022, as we all know and already heard, we had disruptions of supply, we had quality issues and things of that nature that just stacked on each other, and we had all sorts of problems in the market. And there's a whole lot of pain. And when there's a lot of pain, we get a lot of people show up and want to hear about it. What do I do? What do I do? And then we forgot. We forgot the pain because we knew that. And that's why we said attendance would be down. Now, it isn't. That's why it's in red. It was actually up. That's a good thing. Well, we think it's because that was the first year that we did the podcast on the stage and everybody came just for that. But, looking around now, we can't say that anymore because everybody's eating lunch.
Humbling experience.
humbling. But no, I mean, earlier this morning, before lunch, we saw that there was a packed house in here. Every seat pretty much was taken, and there was people there. If you were upstairs last night and going up there again tonight, wonderful, beautiful venue. It's not quite big enough for all of us, but it was great. I mean, everybody's on top of each other, but it was a great attendance up there and a great group because that pain we all know is coming. When that pain started, we have new innovators and new people. The most important part about this number here, the 320 of you, I don't recognize half of you, and I don't know if you look, I mean, that's a great thing. That means there's less gas distributors, less gas suppliers, less gas companies, and so producers of equipment to the gas industries, and more people that are concerned about their supply of CO2, the users of CO2, people that want to understand 45Q credits, LCAs, and how do I do that? How do I apply for it? How does this impact me? We need more and more and more of you all in the room. So starting to see a 37% increase year on year over 2022. That's a huge jump forward, and we want to continue to see that more. So with that, we're going to talk about some of the people that are actually executing and doing that. So where you get, not going to read all this. Where you get it from today will not be where you get it from tomorrow. We already heard from everybody's presentations this morning, the pipelines, the Summit pipeline, the Trailblazer, the Wolf, all of these things. There is ways to eliminate the CO2 that's already on board. What is that? I like this one right here, the Summit Solutions. They have commitments from 57 ethanol plants today to sequester all of their CO2. Not all of them generate merchant CO2, but some of them do. And that goes into Scott's numbers that he was presenting today. Over the next 5 years, it's known, they will go offline. The Keys plants in Southern California, I mean, they were at the ISBT meeting, and he gave the entire business model of exactly why they're taking their merchant CO2 offline and sequestering all of it, because it just makes financial sense for their businesses, as well as there's a benefit to the ethanol and things like that. So that is absolutely going to continue to happen. Reliance numbers, 1,600 tons per day over the next 5 years. We have to replace that CO2 as well as grow on top of that to continue to expand. And for our purposes, we want to see more uses of CO2, not just sequestration. How can we utilize more CO2?
You know, and I just real quick want to hit on the tall grass. This is a really important point. Do not miss this, right? Maybe when the Navigator pipeline got mothballed, a sigh of relief from some people. Oh, my CO2 supply is going to be around a little longer. We have to build out infrastructure. But with that tall grass, talking about repurposing existing natural gas pipelines, some of the challenges that Navigator ran into may be overcome by this existing infrastructure. And so it might not be 5 years out. It may be sooner, depending on how creative we get. So the pipelines aren't going away. Be thinking about the maps that we saw earlier, where ethanol is, and where these pipelines are. The Dakotas, in the Corn Belt. We're going to hit on that in a little bit, but it's kind of shaping up to be a perfect storm.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the biggest non-pain factor that happened in all of this, we heard about it earlier, the Navigator pipeline was canceled. That was huge. That really woke people up, because that was going to take on, that was moving fast, had huge investment, and they were going to do all, and it was right there in the middle where all of these ethanol plants are, many of these ethanol plants are. When that got canceled, everyone, whew, okay, no problem anymore, right? Well, it is a problem, and now we really know it.
Great. And then who you get your CO2 from today will not be who you get it from tomorrow. A couple different examples, and they've all been touched on today, but we do want to look at them specifically. Biogas. We just had Patrick on the podcast. Patrick is the executive director of the American Biogas Council, and he noted that projects are exploding. In just the last year, almost $2 billion of investment into biogas. And what we find when we pick the phones up is people are thinking proactively. I'm going to upgrade my RNG, but I'm not just thinking about the methane now, I'm thinking about the CO2. We talk about the Denmark plant, and they are producing a food beverage grade CO2, but people are now looking at them as an example and getting proactive. The conferences have been growing like crazy. So biogas has some serious steam, serious momentum behind it. Other new technologies, the direct air capture, we'll pull a lot of them up here in a minute, talk about what that looks like. But many of these hubs going to be located down in Texas, the Southwest. We have a note. Carbon Capture just announced they actually aren't going to do their project in Wyoming. Sounds like it's going to be more in the Arizona-Texas region. So as we look at the wells closing, we have these large DAC hubs being produced in the same space. Does that change where the CO2 comes from? Are we going to be able to do it at volume? It's really something we need to pay close attention to.
That carbon capture really feeds into the next one, the cost and the pay. Mm-hmm. Why did they not stay in Wyoming? Because there's not enough renewable energy to run their capture plant. So you need to renew it to be purely green. You need renewable energy to capture the CO2. We all know renewable energy today is more expensive than fossil-based energy sources. It's going to get more expensive, which feeds into our last one. And again, don't look at the charts. Don't worry about it. We've already covered a lot of the reasons why we all believe CO2 will most likely be more expensive. The baseline simple one was, well, if I get $85 a ton to sequester it, isn't that the new baseline cost? Isn't that the baseline cost? Why not sequester all of my CO2 and sell it in the merchant market for less than I can get to sequester it? So that's kind of the baseline, and you're going to see that escalate for a whole lot of other reasons. Some of that being smaller sources. Some of these sources, we heard biogas, 30 to 50 tons a day, not the 400 tons per day type of systems. Now you have to transport it farther, more frequently, aggregate it. All of those things add cost to it, and then you need renewable energies. You need a lot of other things. So the thing that you haven't heard about today, and we are not going to get into the details of it, but there's something called CDRs. Carbon dioxide removal credits. It's a carbon credit trading system. We here in America don't really get too involved in the carbon trade. Europeans much farther along in all of this, but these are, and you talk about all your major high-tech companies, are buying carbon offset credits from direct air capture companies, from even ethanol plants are viable for these carbon credits. So if you capture them, then you could sell those credits to Microsoft and Google and all these companies that have data centers that are using tremendous amounts of energy, therefore using or creating tremendous amounts of CO2. Well, they can keep doing that over here if they capture it over here, guys. So, the whole point of all that is CO2 has a value now. It didn't before. A lot of these ethanol plants, they were just a source gas. It was it's an offshoot. Maybe a lot of them started capturing the methane off of it, but putting that into pipelines, doing RNG, things like that, and very few, if any, really ever captured the CO2. They're starting to now on these RNG facilities and things like that. But now there's a value to CO2, and when there's a value, now there's a competitive market, supply and demand. Not enough supply, price is going to go up for all of us for our merchant use. So there's all these factors are feeding into exactly what we said 2 years ago. And again, none of it's happened dramatically yet today, but it certainly is coming.
Oh, and let's further complicate it one more time. If you hit next, what about competing uses, sustainable aviation fuel? So there are other products coming into the market. My prediction, next year's panel when we are here, we're going to be talking about new uses of CO2.
Absolutely.
I think that is going to be the next leg of this stool, the fifth leg. Those parties coming out and getting involved in the CO2 Summit. But the sustainable...
Most stools have 3 legs, so it's usually just the 3 legs of a stool, then you're adding a 4th leg.
Right. So. This is we're gonna really stabilize. But what's interesting is sustainable aviation.
Stable CO2. So your prediction is we're gonna have a stable CO2 supply. That's your prediction?
No. We're gonna make up for the unstable market with a really stable conference.
Oh, all right.
With our fifth ad. The conference is going to be phenomenal.
And we're going to serve food in here while we talk about it.
I'm getting lightheaded. No, with the sustainable aviation fuel, though, it's really interesting because I talked about paying attention to the maps. LanzaJet just announced a huge factory in Illinois where all the pipelines are running through, where the ethanol production is, where we're going to look at sequestration. So it's just going to get very complex, and that simple supply and demand balance, man, it gets really shaky in the coming
Absolutely.
years.
I mean, add to it, we heard earlier, your urea production, that's going to take off CO2. There's other sources for CO2, and if you can get a utilization credit, whether it's $60 or $85, again, why are you not going to do that? All of these things diminish our current supply that we all need for the existing use cases today. We heard about Canada, their regulations are shutting that down. That's going to diminish our overall supply here in the U.S. All of these things, again, competing interests that are going to feed into it all.
Yeah. So, hey, Jeff, you know what? I would say you were pretty spot on with predictions 2 years ago. Think you nailed them, and I think they kind of carry into the future. But with that said, you got a couple takeaways?
I think we're going to be having this conference for years to come, and I'm pretty sure because CO2 has become so important as much as hydrogen has, that I think there's an announcement later and a sponsorship that's included here at the Gasworld CO2 Summit for the CO2 View magazine that the Gasworld's putting out. Why? Because CO2 is a critical component to a lot of things that we do. It's an ingredient, it's a chemical, it's everything that we use it for. It is not all bad. Sure, too much of it is bad. Too much of anything is bad. CO2 is a critical component that we must protect, use, and we don't want to see the cost escalate so much that we find alternatives like nitrogen for food freezing and things like that. I say it all the time, yes, you can freeze food with nitrogen, but I don't recall a whole lot of wind turbines or solar panels sitting outside of air separation plants. So don't tell me that nitrogen is cleaner than CO2. It's cleaner on your site, but it's not cleaner if you do the entire LCA life cycle analysis of that nitrogen. We don't want to see that. We want to see more CO2. Let's capture what we already have. So we ultimately one day, as Exxon said, 2050, oil flat, right? We're going to need the same amount. The only way you start to see that diminish is get off the need for fossil-based carbon and get recaptured carbon. Capture the carbon from the air, capture the carbon from flue gases, capture the carbon from wherever. Utilize what we've already generated so we have the less need to pull it out over time. Is that going to happen tomorrow? Absolutely not. By 2050, a lot of these guys, Shell, BP, Exxon, they've doubled down on oil production last year. They invested heavily in that. Yeah, sure, we have some money going into carbon and carbon neutrality and things like that, but some of that is just word salad a little bit. It sounds great, but the money is really being invested. Let's pump more oil because that's where we make our money and that's the profitabilities of them. Yeah. So that's how we're going to get there.